So, the recent Inflation Reduction Act is actually largely a climate change bill. This has even kind of been said by Biden himself. So, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about some of the measures we're doing to try to stop climate change, about general perspectives on climate change. And there are kind of two sides to the climate change debate. One being climate change is an immediate emergency and we have to stop putting carbon into the atmosphere or Earth is going to burn. And on the other hand, some say climate change is fake. It's not even real. You don't have to worry about it. Go buy your SUV. And I wanted to talk about why those are both wrong and why they're not actually about science. Both those perspectives are actually about politics. And I think it's very important, and they're both very destructive in different ways. They damage things in different ways. But right now, because the people in power are on the stop putting carbon into the atmosphere right away and take every measure you can, get only on renewable energies with wind turbines and whatnot, and drive an electric car and this kind of stuff, and why we don't need to and actually shouldn't be doing that. So first, I want to talk about putting carbon into the atmosphere in the first place. And I want to kind of put this in perspective. Now, some people think that there's no way, the claim on the other side, the side that says climate change isn't really a thing, claims that there's no way we could possibly put enough carbon into the air, into the atmosphere, to change the climate because there's so much there. And it is true that the amount we're adding into the carbon cycle is fairly small compared to what's already out there in the environment. It's actually really small. But I wanted to talk about why, even though the amount we're putting out is fairly small, it actually makes a difference, and why we can know that climate change is actually at least partially caused by man-made activity, the fact that we're putting this carbon into the air. So imagine a big pond. And this pond is fairly stable over time. Of course, there are fluctuations, but it's fairly stable over time. Maybe there's a creek feeding into it, or maybe it's even a man-made pond and somebody has a hose putting water in to make sure as the water evaporates, it is replaced. So it's fairly stable. And then I come along and I have a bucket of water and a spoon. And I just stand there all day and I use my spoon to put water into this pond. The amount of water I'm putting in at any time, a little teaspoon, the amount of water I'm putting in is not that much compared to what's there. You couldn't even tell a difference in that body of water after each spoon that I put in. Even after I put a bucket in, you're not going to be able to measure the level of the pond and say, hey, it's gone up any. But I empty that bucket into the pond, and then as soon as I'm done, I go and I get another bucket. And I spoon that in, and I go and I get another bucket, and I spoon that in. If I keep doing that long enough, because I am adding water to the system, it was fairly stable. It had water coming in to replace what was being lost by evaporation. So at least some of what I'm putting in is surplus. I'm adding more water to it. If I keep doing that long enough, I may start to make that body of water rise. And if I keep doing it day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, eventually I can make it rise by inches, I can make it rise by feet. Over time, especially, if it's generational, if my kids do it and their kids do it, eventually it could go high enough that it starts to, damage trees and take over people's property and whatever, just by adding a spoon at a time. The amount that I'm putting in at any given time is insignificant. But over time, the collection of what I'm putting in makes a difference. And that's kind of the scale of what we're doing with adding carbon to the atmosphere. And we've been adding carbon through fossil fuels, through burning of fossil fuels. We've been doing that on a relatively large scale for hundreds of years now. Since the start of the Industrial Revolution, it grew over time, but to one degree or another, we've been doing it for hundreds of years, and even to a lesser degree, thousands. It is also true that thousands of years ago, our ancestors realized that pitch, which is a fossil fuel, was useful for smelting metals. So to one degree or another, we've been doing it for thousands of years, and then to a more substantial degree, we've been doing it for hundreds of years. Now, it's also important to keep in mind when we're talking about using this spoon and water. Well, I'm the only one, unless my kids take over, I'm the only one using the spoon to put the water in, but this is actually a worldwide global project we have going of adding carbon to the atmosphere. And the United States, or whatever country you're in, probably, unless you're in China, is not the major producer of carbon worldwide. The first is China. The second is India, which I believe is actually fairly far down behind China. And then the United States may be third. I'm actually not sure what's third. I'm not sure where the United States falls. But number one is China by a lot. And then the number two is India. So it's like if we stopped right now in the United States, if we stopped adding carbon into the atmosphere, it would be like taking a little dropper and taking a few drops out of that spoon every time it's put in. So on this relatively small scale, as far as what we're doing right now, this relatively small scale, we're making an even smaller difference by doing that. Now, don't get me wrong, climate change is real, and we do want to stop putting all this carbon into the atmosphere. We kind of want to whatever extent we can, we kind of want to leave the Earth alone and let it regulate itself. So to the extent that we can stop putting all the carbon into the atmosphere, we should probably do that. But whether we jump on electric cars right now, or we say, hey, electric cars are kind of in their infancy. The electric cars today are the Commodore 64. Yes, we can finally make an electric car that you can drive around and charge up at your house or whatever, and it can actually drive for several hundred miles before it needs a charge. It has finally become a kind of viable thing. It is still like the Commodore 64, and there's a lot of improvement to be made. Hopefully over time, the batteries are going to get smaller. It's going to take less time to charge them. And we're going to get a better renewable energy electricity infrastructure to be able to charge that. But right now, we don't have the technology for any of that. Right now, we should still be mainly in the research stage. If you want to drive an electric car because you think that's cool, and maybe it gives you some price stability when gasoline fluctuates, go for it. But telling everybody to buy an electric car because it's revolutionary is kind of like telling everybody to buy a Commodore 64. Yeah, it was kind of the first to really be something that the average person could have in their home, and it would be like a computer. It wasn't what we have today. I mean, even on our little cell phones, this thing, which is a cheap cell phone, has way more power than what you would get with even something much more recent than a Commodore 64. And that's going to happen with electric cars. It's eventually going to happen with different kinds of energy production. Solar panels now are apparently a lot better than they were 10 years ago, and improvements will continue and discoveries will continue. If we rush to it too soon, it's not going to have the effect we think it's going to have. But, well, there are some effects that we kind of know it's already going to have, like vast increases, dramatic increases in energy cost. There's the famous quote by Barack Obama saying that under the plan he had proposed, energy prices would necessarily skyrocket. Everybody knows if you start forcing changes from fossil fuel energy to renewable energy and from fossil fuel transportation to electric transportation, it's going to make things more difficult, and it's going to make things less stable, because right now there is no renewable electric energy that is as stable as using fossil fuels or nuclear. We just don't have that ability to do it in a reasonable way now. So that side that's saying, hey, we need to do everything right now, no, we actually don't. We actually don't. Yes, climate change is changing things. It's making things different. But if we stopped right now, if the United States stopped right now putting any carbon into the atmosphere, there would still be a lot of carbon going into the atmosphere from other countries. We would not even cut out the majority of that carbon by cutting out our own. And carbon that we've been putting in, that other countries have been putting in too, for hundreds of years, is still making an impact. It's still adding overall to the material within that carbon cycle. And that is adding to global temperatures and climate change. So, one, we should probably be putting more thoughts into how to deal with the changes created by climate change, rather than putting all this into, hey, we have to stop it now. And when we're thinking about replacing renewable energy and this kind of stuff, we need to think in the long term and how to do it well rather than how to do it fast, because those are two very different things. So why then are there these two sides? Why are some, including a lot of scientists, saying, hey, climate change is here and we have to do something now, and do something to stop it now, not do something to deal with it, but do something to stop it now. And the other side is saying, no, climate change isn't even real, largely. And that difference is not a scientific difference. That difference is a political difference. And I'm going to explain it to you in some really cynical terms. It's because the majority of fossil fuel resources and fossil fuel industries exist in Republican states within the United States. It's those red states where the oil is drilled and refined and the coal is dug and this kind of stuff. And money from the sale of those resources goes primarily to Republican politicians. The Republicans obviously then don't want to cut off their own supply, so they would rather say, hey, there's no problem at all with fossil fuels. Let's keep bringing them out of the ground and using them, because that money is going to help them continue to be elected. If you're a Democrat, you're not getting most of that fossil fuel money. Your rivals are, so you would really rather say, hey, we need to stop using that fossil fuel right now, because we don't want those guys to have the money to compete with us politically. So there's major political pressure to say not just that not just that climate change is an emergency, but that climate change is an emergency and we have to do something about it now by stopping drilling for oil and stopping digging up coal and using coal to generate electricity and stuff like that. It is really political, and it is about Democrats wanting to stop their rivals from having this money come in. And that's just the way it is, and it's harmful. And it's not actually benefiting anything. And we need to start thinking about this in a reasonable way so that we're not destroying our own economy, but at the same time, we're not denying that a problem is a problem and then just ignoring it. Thanks for watching. I'm glad you stayed to the end. Please like, subscribe, share with somebody, and leave a comment to tell me you agree or that you think I'm an idiot or whatever you want to say. Leave a comment below, and I may or may not respond to you. Have a great one.